யாதும் ஊரே யாவரும் கேடீர்.
செம்மொழி வலையொலி யூடியூப் சேனல். இந்த சேனலின் மூலமாக, அந்த வலையொலியின் மூலமாக பல்வேறு தகவல்களை தினந்தோறும் நாங்கள் வழங்கி கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய அந்த நிலையில் முழுமையாக கண்டு பார்க்கலாம்.
Here are a few shining examples of his craftsmanship. நீங்கள் தரும் குறுகுங்கால் தன்னென்னும் தீ யாண்டு பெற்றாள் இவள். Withdraw it burns, approach it soothes the pain. Whence did the maid this wondrous fire obtain? நெஞ்சத்தார் காதல் அவராக வெய்துண்டல் அஞ்சுதம் வேபாக்கு அறிந்து. Within my heart my lover dwells, from food I turn that smacks of heat, lest he should feel it burn. எற்றென்று இறங்குவ செய்யற்க செய்வனேல் மற்றன்ன செய்யாமை நன்று. Do nothing that soul repenting must deplore. If thou hast sinned, it is well, thou dost sin no more. In his preface, V.V.S. Iyer contends that Drew had given but a feeble translation, while Dr. Pope's verses do not at all do justice to the merits of the original, but on the contrary deform its great thoughts by giving them a stilted expression, and that in the translation of the titles of chapters also, Pope has been singularly unhappy in many instances, as very unhappy renderings of the original that do not give the reader any idea of what is contained in the respective chapters. V.V.S. Iyer mentions the following: the knowledge of power, 48th chapter, for Vali Aridal, knowing the place for Idan Aridal, the right scepter for Sengonmai, power in speech for Sol Vanmai, power in action for Vinay Tidpam, the knowledge of indications for Kurippu Aridal, knowing the quality of hate for Pagaithiram Theridal. It becomes clear that V.V.S. Iyer has defined himself against Pope when he declares that the latter has wrongly chosen the heroic couplet instead of the style of the English Bible, which in his view lends itself to the expression of every variety of thought, from the plain and the naive to the most sublime and dignified that the human mind can conceive. When V.V.S. Iyer advocates the authorized version of the Bible as the model to be followed by the translator of the Bible, he asserts that the thought and diction of Valluvar resembles the great masterpieces of the Bible, especially the Ecclesiastics, the Proverbs and wisdom of Solomon and the sermons of Jesus. But later in the same preface, he attacks Pope for having spoken of Christian influences on Thirukkural, and he declares that the Kural does not show that he has even heard of any of the peculiar doctrines of Christianity. If Besky, Digo and Pope are insinuating that Valluvar's work could not have been moral in tone, but for the impact of the teachings of the Apostle St. Thomas at Mylapore, V.V.S. Iyer, P.S. Sundaram and others of the same ilk make much of what they believe to be echoes of Manu's Dharma Shastra, Kamandaka's Niti Shara, Kautilya's Artha Shastra and even Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra, all of which were written in Sanskrit. But even a casual comparison of the so-called parallel passages will reveal the truth of what G.U. Pope says. It would be possible indeed to find a close Sanskrit parallel to nearly every nomic verse in Tamil poetry, but in many cases the beauty, spontaneity and the terseness of the Tamil stanza seem to prove its originality. Discussing the possible sources of Naladiyar, Pope observes that a majority of the verses were almost certainly sung by Jain ascetics, yet there are a few that seem to be from the Mahabharata, and undoubtedly many of the quatrains are fragments of the old ethical teaching which goes under the name of Niti Shastra, and significantly adds in a footnote the following quote from Monier Williams' Indian Wisdom. He says, "How inferior the verses of Bhadragiri are may be seen by examining the version given in Trubner's series. One should remember here that Bhadragiri is supposed to be the greatest master of didactic verse in Sanskrit. V.V.S. Iyer swears by the suitability of the biblical language, but his English is a far cry from that of the authorized version. By a profuse sprinkling of words like behold, thou, thy, thine, and suffixing verbs with th and eth, he hopes to reproduce the biblical forms, forgetting that simplicity is the hallmark of the language of the Bible as well as of Thirukkural. The diction in Kural is simple, much simpler than that of Sangam poems, though the syntax may at times be complex. It is for this reason that Pope says Valluvar is generally very simple and his commentators very profound. But V.V.S. Iyer's language is often needlessly pompous and circumlocutory. If some of Pope's chapter headings are, as alleged by Iyer, misleading, the Tamil translators are high-flown and long-winded. He calls, for instance, Pochavamai, which means unforgetfulness or slackness. He translates it as guarding against insouciance. Veruvanda Seyyamai is translated as abstaining from deeds that cause trepidation. Idukkan Kalayamai as intrepidity in the face of misfortune. Mannarai Cherந்து Vizhugal as comporting oneself before princess. Pen Vazhi Cheramai as submission of wife government. Nanuthura Uraithal as overpassing the bounds of decorum. Padarmelindu Irangal as bewailing the pangs of separation and pining away. Kan Viduppu Azhidal as the wasting of the eyes through wistful longing. Tanipadar Migudi as anguish of heart that the husband feeleth not as oneself. Punarchi Vidumbal as the impatience of the pair to fly to each other's arms. Pulavi Nunukam as the finesse of Budari. Udal Uvagai as the charm of Budari. While translating individual couplets also, extremely enamored of ostentation, he sacrifices brevity and uses many more words than the original to convey much less. The couplets சமன் செய்து சீர்தூக்கும் கோல்போல் அமைந்து ஒருபால் கோடாமை சான்றோர்க்கு அணி becomes in his prose version, behold the weighing beam, for it is straight in itself and weigheth justly. The glory of the voice is to be like unto it, and to incline neither to this side nor to that. One of the well-known couplets, புறங்குன்றி கண்டனையரேனும் அகங்குன்றி மூக்கில் கரியார் உடைத்து, புறங்குன்றி கண்டனையரேனும் அகங்குன்றி மூக்கில் கரியார் உடைத்து is rendered, the kundri seed is fair on one side, but the other side of it is black. There are men who are like unto it, they are fair on the outside, but their inside is all black. All the rhetorical skill of Iyer doesn't help him retain the poetry in the original. The couplet, ஒளியார் முன் ஒளியர் ஆதல் வெளியார் முன் வான்சுதை வண்ணம் கொளல், is deprived of its poetic metaphor in the rendering, discuss wisdom in the congregation of the wise, but answer fools according to the measures of their folly. It is a pity suggestions of many a word in the sparsely worded Kural are lost on the translator. In one of the most remarkable couplets, the lover states that the lady's embrace gives him the joy that the householder experiences when he, staying in his house, eats his share of the food. தம்மில் இருந்து தமது பார்த்து உண்டற்றால் அம்மா அறிவை முயக்கு. Here the simile conveys Valluvar's vision of life, as it is a celebration of life on earth, and the first line mentions the requirements for a joyous life, but all the three of them, Pope, Iyer and Sundaram, miss the emphasis on one's own house, tham il, when they translate the Kural as when one eats from household store with kindly grace, sharing his meal, such is this golden maid's embrace. This is Pope's translation. The embrace of this lovely lady is supremely joyous, even as the family life of the householder who eateth his portion only after distributing charity. This is Iyer. Clasping this girl on my joy is already a householder who works, shares and eats. This is Sundaram's translation. As usual, Pope, hunting for a rhyme for embrace, adds the superfluous phrase with kindly grace. Iyer's weakness being pleonasm, he seems to insist on repeating the idea that one can infer from what has already been said when he ends his sentence with only after distributing charity. In his eagerness to be verbally economical, Sundaram has ignored the significance of Tammil irundu. Professor P.S. Sundaram's version, enjoying the prestige of publication by Penguin Books that guarantees international circulation, has had the advantage of numerous earlier translations by foreigners and native scholars, but hasn't, alas, derived much benefit from them. Categorically stating that no English translation of Thirukkural is entirely satisfactory, Sundaram chooses to comment on only 2 translations, while dismissing all the rest as mostly pedestrian, if not sheer doggerel. In his opinion, Pope's lines in an antique meter extend right across the page like pythons, while Rajaji's prose rendering is less concerned with Valluvar the poet than with Valluvar the thinker and teacher. The other great advantage of being a Tamilian exposed to English education at no less a university than Oxford hasn't helped him much. His introduction and endnotes have nothing comparable to Pope's introduction, let alone the latter's lexicon and concordance. That Sundaram hasn't understood the splendor of the architectonics of Thirukkural becomes evident when he states that the rigid adherence to the number 10 has often resulted in the same idea appearing in different words in order to make up the prescribed number of stanzas. For instance, couplets 8 and 10 under chapter 1 of the poem. His readings of the two couplets, Aravali Andanan Thal Serndarku Allal Piravali Neendal Aridu, the feet of the Lord with the virtue wheel will help to cross the sea of birth. This is Sundaram's translation. Piravi Perungadal Neenduvar Neendar Iraivan Adi Seradar. The ocean of birth can be crossed by those who clasp God's feet as none else. That is again Sundaram's translation. Bereft of all poetry and profundity of the original, make them appear the same. Sundaram seems to have ignored Parimelalagar's insightful remarks on the nature, function and relevance of each couplet in every chapter of Thirukkural. In one place in the introduction, Sundaram maintains that since all surviving manuscripts contain 1330 verses and attribute them to one single author, namely Valluvar, he has as much right to his identity as the author of the Kural, as Homer to his as the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. First of all, the example Sundaram gives is erroneous because modern Western scholarship has discussed at length the question of the collective authorship of what are known as Homer's writings. To add insult to injury, 3 pages later, in the same introduction, Sundaram, contradicting himself, declares whether all these chapters of Purutpal were conceived and carried out by one man who by his literary skill gave it a place in the Tamil language as significant as the Arthashastra in Sanskrit may well be doubted. For all we know, he says, some of these chapters at least may have been later accretions and not all of them by the same man. That Professor Sundaram's knowledge of Tamil prosody and Tamil literary tradition is not very sound may be understood even when he supports the view of Quipper of the Kern Institute, Leiden, that in as many as 119 of the 380 stanzas of Book 1 of Thirukkural, the correct way of printing the stanzas should be 3 feet in the first line and 4 in the second. This view, also cherished by Pope, is born of the ignorance of the nature and function of a Kural Venba as conceived by the ancient Tamils, who also knew about the complex role of rhymes and alliterations in different poetic forms. And Valluvar was a past master in the art of using initial and internal rhymes in the right place. Though Sundaram doesn't speak of V.V.S. Iyer's translation, he seems to have defined himself against Iyer as well as against Pope when he harps on the virtue of brevity. He says, those who translate the Kural at length do not do it the least justice, for its soul is brevity, and with it least is most just. The poetry, to adapt Wilfred Owen, is in the pithy. But his ideal of brevity at any cost leads to insipid renderings wholly devoid of poetry. When he translates Villeru Ulavar Pagai Kolinum Kollarka Solleru Ulavar Pagai as make force of bowmen if you must, never of penmen. The beautiful metaphor that equates the learned and the physically mighty with the ploughman is lost in the translation, and the penman may create the impression that Thirukkural is a modern work. When one reads Sundaram's couplet, "My love's white teeth and soft lips are milk and honey," one would think that in the original the lady's teeth and lips are simply compared to milk and honey respectively, but it is supposed to be a translation of "Palodu then kalandatre panimozhi val yeitru uriya neer." His prime interest is in paraphrasing the idea of a couplet in a minimum number of words, as he ignores the fact that Valluvar gives equal importance to the idea and its poetic expression. As V.V.S. Iyer rightly says, sparkling wit and humour, the pointed statement, fancy, irony, the naive question, the picturesque simile, there is not one of these and others of the 1,000 tricks of the born artist that our author has not employed in this perfect masterpiece of art. But all these tricks, unknown to Dharma Shastras, Nidhi Shastras and Kama Sutras, which Sundaram considers the sources of Thirukkural, are given the go-by in his English renderings. Valluvar was far ahead of his times in his insightful perceptions of certain aspects of life and literature. When he says, "Navildhorum Nulnayam Polum Payildhorum Pambudayalar Thodarbu," he means just as the more you study a work, the greater the beauty it reveals, the closer the friendship with the cultured, the greater the pleasure you will derive. But in Sundaram's translation, what remains is the comparison, not the revelation behind it. This is his translation. Good friends are like good books, a perpetual delight. Sundaram's trenchant economy may often destroy the poetry of the original, may at times distort its idea, and may occasionally disclose nothing of it when he writes that friendship is mean, which boasts, "He loves me and I him." The reader may wonder why Valluvar should be so harsh on such friends that simply declare their love for each other. But the original couplet states the reason unambiguously. "Inayar ivar emakku innam yam endru punayinum pullennum natpu." It is heartening to note that such translations notwithstanding, some great men of the West could identify the uniqueness of Valluvar's work, as evidenced in the following statement by Ariel, who calls Thirukkural "this book without name by an author without name." Pope says he is equally perfect in thought, in language and in poetry, in the austere metaphysical contemplation of the great mysteries of the divine nature, as in the easy and graceful analysis of the tenderest emotions of the heart. If a translator of Thirukkural loses sight of one of the three dimensions, thought, language and poetry, or overemphasizes one of them, he will have to pay a heavy price for his irresponsibility. Thank you.